debate, I'm defying. Hard labor, I came here to modify the system. Take them down if they ain't listening. Straight demolition. From young, everything resistant. Good times I don't really miss them. Gotta pay the cost, no tick. Wick, this hard labor and I'm kicked. Never fit in with the crowd or got into politicking. You can tell I'm built different, trust me. It'll be a sequence of events if you touch me. Even when the women do it love. I've been eye to eye with great people, but you'll be mistaken if you put another one above. Hello everyone, welcome to This Week in Tyranny, the most hardcore news show on earth. I'm Conrad Rogas, I am your host, and this is episode 82. Welcome everyone. Subscribers new and old, viewers new and old. It's June 30th, 2024. So everyone's talking about the presidential debate that just went down this week, and I'll talk about it too. One of the core methods or strategies of growing this channel, the Truth and Law channel, truthandlaw.com, since the beginning it's been to chime in on the things that everyone is talking about actually. This Week in Tyranny in particular, it's really supposed to be point-by-point breakdown of what is going on week by week. That's kind of changed since I started. We're going on 100 episodes, close to. But this is kind of the point, and it exemplifies the work to be done in the world. You're supposed to go where the problem is, and that's always been my job, really. I'm trying to go where the problem is, where the work needs to be done. And now when you do this goes for anybody. When you are there where the problem is, you say and do the things that no one else is willing to say and do. Okay, that is how you actually get change done in the world. We're talking about like real change. We're not talking about, changing the blinds on your window. We're talking about like real issues that go unsolved week by week, year by year. And at the end of the day, when we talk about problem solving, to solve any problem, to achieve any sort of goal, the solution has always been in perspective. Specifically the changing of perspective. It's about, can you see the problem in a different way than you or anyone else has historically seen it in the past? Can you frame the issue in a way that opens up a different way of thinking about the problem? Okay, that's what it's all about. The quote by Buckminster Fuller is, "You never change things by fighting the current reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Okay, that's what Buckminster Fuller said. Now, does that mean don't fight tyranny? No. He doesn't. What he means is, don't waste time beating your head against the wall, right? Don't exert energy carrying out a process that's not making any forward progress. Don't exert energy lamenting one or both of these candidates, right? Lamenting them to people who have neither the knowledge or the wisdom to understand the world, nor the will to change it. To change this world, individuals have to lead by example and replace the celebrities, the influencers, and the candidates and the so-called leaders. Okay, so we won't do any bashing of Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and we certainly won't do any endorsing. But really, this show is going to do both of those things that need to be done. Is to provide a historical perspective on the 2024 presidential debate, showing the decline of American politics, culture, and men in general. The decline of man in general, that's one thing. And the second thing is, at the same time, to do it in the way that these candidates should have done it. Not complaining about somebody else or the job they did, but getting up on the podium yourself and showing how it's done. So that is what I'm trying to do here. So first, let's talk about perspective, and second, we'll talk about the man himself, the individual. And the eye-opener here, really, the perspective changer here is that this 2024 debate that just went down between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump, this debate and election in general, it's a perfect mirror image of the 1980 debate. In 1980, 44 years ago, Jimmy Carter was president then, and he ran against Ronald Reagan. And I will play parts of that debate and use that to make my two main points. The main takeaways from the 2024 debate are, one, the campaign issues and talking points are still the same as 1980. You're going to see it's still exactly the same. There is no change on the horizon because the perspective and the so-called solutions are the same as 1980. Excuse me. That's first. Second, in 44 years, there has been
such a horrific drop-off, a terrible decline in personality, in decorum, professionalism, and the ability to speak coherently and directly. And it's really general competence. Like, we've lost general know-how. And when the Carter-Reagan debate is viewed side by side with the 2024 Biden-Trump debate, it's really almost too shocking to fathom. It's like you pulled something out of another universe. That's the big difference here. The quality and ability of man himself, of the individual, has changed. But the blueprint or the story of this country has not changed at all. It's still the same. History repeats itself, and there's nothing new under the sun. And you see that when you look at what was going on in 1980 and how that election went down. So you have Reagan, the Republican. He's measured. He relies on reason and not emotion. His main concern is the economy and quality of life of Americans, that he will improve through lower taxes and fewer regulations, right? And after 4 years of Carter, the point has really been made for him, because things have gotten so bad during that time that when he comes out, Ronald Reagan, the election is his to lose. I'm just setting the stage here, right? I'm just painting a picture of what's going on at the time. Then you have Carter, the Democrat. He's more of the classic politician. He speaks in politically correct statements, upholding the status quo political traditions. His main concern is that America is the tip of the spear, it's the head of the table of a global movement, viewing the presidency in terms of a world crusade for democracy, so-called democracy, right? So the cards are set exactly the same as they are here with Trump and Biden. But there are so many more intricate little similarities and details. It's really more than I can get to, but here are a few. Reagan in 1980, he criticized Carter for being too weak in negotiations, right? Specifically with the Soviet Union and the pressure they were exerting on the Middle East. Remember, 1980, this is the beginning of the Cold War, as we call it. So Reagan said that the treaties and agreements were too imbalanced and they were detrimental to the United States. Of course, Trump says the same thing, exactly the same in 2024. Says that Joe Biden has presided over America becoming the laughingstock of the world of geopolitics. Right? He has said that Putin would have never invaded Russia if he was president. Okay? And look, Russia is no longer the Soviet Union, but the old enemy plays the old role in the same old story. And it's really remarkable to see it side by side. I wanted to really compare and contrast, play them both at the same time, but I'll only be using footage from 1980, really. And I'll reference the 2024 debate. I'm not actually going to show every clip and every little similarity for two reasons. One is just time. And two, it doesn't really deserve to be here. You know, this debate that went down 2024, and people have said this, they feel it. It's really not a good look for the nation or for the world in general. That debate has zero replay value. It should not be broken down. There's not much to break down and break it up into clips and then make more content using that, recycling it. But the 1981 is interesting. It's an interesting thing to look at and put it in perspective. It actually has a lot of value. But I'll get to that. Now, to this claim, Carter, of course, responds by saying that by playing hardball with the Soviets, that's too dangerous, right? It's too risky. Really, Carter makes nuclear weapons the most important, he says it himself, his most important issue in the world. He sees that as the only existential threat to humanity. But Biden, by the way, views the existential threat as climate change. Interestingly, I'll get there too. But anyway, Carter says that Reagan's policy on nuclear weapons is reckless. And what policy is that? That's basically the policy that America doesn't just lay down its military power to appease the Soviets, right? Well, that's what Biden says against Trump. He has said in this debate that World War III is going to start because of Donald Trump. Why? Because Trump does not respect international agreements like NATO, for example. Why doesn't he respect them? Well, of course, Trump says that it's because America does all the heavy lifting for global initiatives but enjoys none of the benefits. That's true. And again, this comes back to the idea of being strong in negotiations, right? It's America first as opposed to being this horse that carries the wagon of all these global endeavors. We're like the leader of the free world. That's what the Democrats have said, right? It's that as opposed to America first. So 1980, 2024, it's a mirror image, whether you look at policy like I just did, or you look at character and even appearance and speech. And the similarities run deep here. Ronald Reagan was, of course, an actor. The people recognize him from TV first and foremost. He was never a career politician. He was an actor that went into the military in World War II. And so then later the common man related to him. Now, it's the same thing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was also an actor. Not in movies, no, but on Celebrity Apprentice, WWE wrestling appearances. He played a life role and continues to play a life role as an actor. And really, that's what the profession of theater has morphed into. There are no more good movies, right? There are no more of these stories. The stories are actually played out in reality. It's become a fusion of reality TV and life itself. And these stories are played out in real life and really on social media over a period of time. And these are the modern day actors and TV personalities. You know, Trump was in his day, is in his day what Reagan was in his day, in Reagan's time. And I see how that could be hard to wrap your mind around. It doesn't seem right. But that's the reason I talk about things like this, because too few people have perspectives like that. And really it's because too few people are independent thinkers. I don't hear this said. I don't hear a lot of psychological analysis that goes to these kind of topics. And you may not agree with me, right? I may not be the most knowledgeable. You may not like me, but I'm the epitome of an independent thinker. That's why I encourage everybody else to be. There are plenty of people here capable of it, but you got to be capable and then willing. You actually have to go out and do the thinking. And that's what the solution to any problem is about, as I've said. It's thinking independently. It's looking at old problems in a new way. So that there's another similarity where they come from, and their name, the name itself, even the name, Ronald and Donald, it's almost the same name. And the last names too, they suggest strength. Reagan is very similar to the word regain. Reagan. It's even if you just look at his last name, it's again. That's what the Reagan presidency is all about. It's about a return to traditional strength. They will regain strength. They're going to rebuild again, right? And what does Trump say? Make America great again. If you write out the words great again and you remove a few letters from the middle, from the beginning and end, it spells Reagan. That might not speak to you, but it speaks to your subconscious. When slogans like this are made, linguistics are taken into consideration for sure. But you as the viewer, you don't know it, but you're supposed to resonate with that sort of thing, the same sort of thing that Reagan's supporters resonated with back in 1980. Because it is actually the same story being played over again. And what story is it? You know, Reagan and Trump, they're stopgaps in the advance of collectivism. Collectivism is rolls and rolls on ever since this nation was founded and before. So Reagan and Trump, they say reasonable things. Just reasonable enough for the disgruntled population to sit back and relax and think that they are in the lead now, that they are winning. But things don't get fixed. Life may improve marginally, just a bit, and then in 4 or 8 years, the collectivist advance that comes back with a vengeance. And this is why Donald Trump is poised to win this election. This is why I don't support him. This is why I'm so hard on conservatives, because I get that he's a good candidate. I get that he's better than anybody else. That's the problem. The seesaw swing from left to right, then back to left again after he's out, that will provide the momentum that international pressure groups lack to take their global initiatives to the next level. They're trying to get all these things done that they have not been able to yet, and this will allow them to do it. It's like when you shake up a hornet's nest. It's like what's the other quote that people say? You know, when you aim at the king, you best not miss. That's how it is with this. You have an opportunity to get someone who's an outsider, you know, as the leader of America, as far as the world is concerned. If you don't make use of that opportunity, it's going to be the last one, and that's what it seems like. And I said international pressure groups. You know, I've stopped calling these people the global communists and Satanists and the dark occult for now. In this episode, they're just international influence and pressure groups. Nobody denies the existence of that. There are international pressure groups that are working to get their agendas passed and implemented. So, but what role do we have here played by Trump? You know, Ronald will regain, and Donald will make America great again. Great again. It's Reagan again. And what else is he going to do? He's going to Trump, right? To Trump is to be better than someone, to be better than your opponent, to beat them. You play your Trump card. So, and then you take their names and contrast that with the names of their opponents. Who do you got? Joe and Jimmy. You know, harmless names. It's any Joey and Jimmy from the street. And this is what they are. Carter is really a solid last name. But what is a Carter? I don't know. But when you look at him, you look at the man's face, it doesn't exactly radiate authority. He seems more like a boy who puts the shopping carts back into place at the market. He's a shopping carter. That's the kind of Carter that Jimmy is. And Biden, he's just biding his time, right? Biden is just riding. And isn't this not what people make fun of him for? That, you know, we joke that they wheel him around and they take him from the old folks' home and hold his hand, you know, from the senior folks' retirement home. And it's just like Carter was criticized for not doing enough. Carter was also had the legacy of being as like a passenger in the White House. Like a rider in the cart, so to speak, right? So, and Biden is the same. He is just riding. He's just biding his time. He'll be out of here soon, you know. The story is the same because the game is the same. The advance of tyranny is like a cancer. There's only one way it's going to end if it goes unchecked. It's going to end with the extinction of the human species. The problems of the present day should be looked at as a disease, like a disease. You should approach it in a medical and scientific way, is the way the approach should be. Starting from first observation. What is the problem? People are sick, people are losing their property, crimes, you know, people get away with crimes unpunished, whereas the regular person, the working person, pays for the criminal's crimes. Okay? Then you don't go straight to the diagnosis, then you need to go back to the principles. What are the principles of health? You need to know this before you do any kind of operation. You assume axioms, but you have to define your axioms with the principles. What is a healthy individual? What is a healthy society? What does it look like? What is it based on? What are the fundamental axioms that we're operating from here as the doctor or the scientist? Then you put those observations that you made up against those principles. You put them together, and based on that, you make your diagnosis, which is what? To define the causes of the disease. That's the diagnosis. It's not just identifying the disease. What's implied then is that you're going to know what it's caused by. And then you can address it. Finally, you can take actions to remove the disease and introduce health. It's a two-part process. It's not just removing disease. It's to remove disease and introduce health. Both at the same time. You cannot only have one. Now the people, they're still in the observation stage and have been since feudalism. People see that things are bad to different degrees, varying degrees, right? But they haven't addressed fundamental philosophy. And because of that, their diagnosis is wrong, always. Your diagnosis, you know, everybody else out there, is that our leaders are corrupt or incompetent. So therefore, your cure or treatment is just to replace them. Incorrect. It's incorrect because you're operating from the axiom that the responsibility to govern and administrate falls on someone other than yourself. So because you don't understand what a healthy society or a healthy individual works like, what their mind works like as far as freedom versus authority, you will always make the wrong diagnosis, because the diagnosis is not to vote the wrong guy out and the right guy in. The treatment is you fix it. You make yourself non-rulable, unrulable, right? And I don't want to put the cart before the horse here. We're really getting there. But let me continue. So the best we can do in that paradigm of thinking, where people do things for us and we vote for a leader, and if they don't do a good job, we can just vote them out and replace them. But we do not represent ourselves. We have representatives that do it for us. The best we can do in that paradigm in 2024 is Donald Trump. In 1980, it was Ronald Reagan. Neither of them has made any movement toward health. Remember, we're talking about this as a disease, if these people are doctors or medicines. They only momentarily delayed the progression of the symptoms, which is not worth shit. When you're dying from cancer and excruciating pain, it is no good to halt the level of pain, the increase, at the current level. That's still pointless suffering. That's still no chance at life. What are we even talking about? So no matter how good your candidate is, you'll never keep him around, because you're still fighting the disease on the disease's terms. You're fighting an uphill battle because you're still going in the direction of the disease. You're not introducing health. So we don't want the symptoms to stop. We don't want the spread of symptoms to stop, right? We don't want them to stay where they are. We want them to actually stop. We want the symptoms to subside. Okay? Now, where are the people who are saying that today? There aren't any. And I'm going to open up the comments, since this is about a debate. So name one man or woman today from my generation who understands the world in this way and can articulate it in this way. In the grand course of history, things are the same as they've always been, sure. But when it comes to the ability of men to think and speak logically and coherently, we've come so far since 1980. And some of you who are watching this, you remember these times. Some of you remember this election. You remember a time where men and women conducted themselves in a certain way, and it meant something to be a human being. Culture and pop culture even, they had a value. Movies were good and they were worth seeing. You had compelling personalities. Some of you lived in these times. Why don't you talk about it? Those of you that have children, have you really made an effort to convey to your children what they're about to lose? What they've already had taken away from them? Now, I may sound full of resentment. Trust me, I got no resentment in my heart, really. I'm just offering an independent perspective, because I see the cancer and I know the cure. It's really simple, actually. It lies in your will and action as an individual. And with that being said, I'm going to play a part from the beginning of the 1980 debate. Keep in mind, not only the atmosphere, not only the decorum that I'm talking about, but also the topic. What's the main battleground of any presidential election? Of course, it's always going to be the economy, the quality of life. So keep it in mind. What was happening 44 years ago and what's happening today? So President Carter is asked about the economy, and Governor Reagan responds.
Mr. President, when you were elected in 1976, the Consumer Price Index stood at 4.8%. It now stands at more than 12%. Perhaps more significantly, the nation's broader underlying inflation rate has gone up from 7 to 9%. Now, a part of that was due to external factors beyond U.S. control, notably the more than doubling of oil prices by OPEC last year. Because the United States remains vulnerable to such external shocks, can inflation, in fact, be controlled? If so, what measures would you pursue in a second term?
Again, it's important to put the situation into perspective. In 1974, we had a so-called oil shock, wherein the price of OPEC oil was raised to an extraordinary degree. We had an even worse oil shock in 1979. In 1974, we had the worst recession, the deepest and most penetrating recession since the Second World War. The recession that resulted this time was the briefest we've had since the Second World War. In addition, we've brought down inflation. Early this year, the first quarter, we did have a very severe inflation pressure brought about by the OPEC price increase. It averaged about 18% the first quarter of this year. The second quarter, we had dropped it down to about 13%. The most recent figures, the last 3 months of the third quarter of this year, the inflation rate is 7%. Still too high, but it illustrates very vividly that in addition to providing an enormous number of jobs, 9 million new jobs in the last 3.5 years, that the inflationary threat is still urgent on us. I noticed that Governor Reagan recently mentioned the Reagan-Kemp-Roth proposal, which his own running mate, George Bush, described as voodoo economics, and said that it would result in a 30% inflation rate. And Business Week, which is not a Democratic publication, said that this Reagan-Kemp-Roth proposal, and I quote them, I think, was completely irresponsible and would result in inflationary pressures which would destroy this nation. So our proposals are very sound and very carefully considered to stimulate jobs, to improve the industrial complex of this country, to create tools for American workers, and at the same time would be anti-inflationary in nature. So to add 9 million new jobs, to control inflation, and to plan for the future with the energy policy now intact as a foundation is our plan for the years ahead.
Mr. Ellis, do you have a follow-up question from Mr. Carter?
Yes, Mr. President, you have mentioned the creation of 9 million new jobs. At the same time, the unemployment rate still hangs high, as does the inflation rate. Now, I wonder, can you tell us what additional policies you would pursue in a second administration in order to try to bring down that inflation rate? And would it be an act of leadership to tell the American people they're going to have to sacrifice to adopt a leaner lifestyle for some time to come?
Yes, we have demanded that the American people sacrifice, and they've done very well. As a matter of fact, we are importing today about 1/3 less oil from overseas than we did just a year ago. We've had a 25% reduction since the first year I was in office. At the same time, as I said earlier, we have added about 9 million net new jobs in that period of time, a record never before achieved. Also, the new energy policy has been predicated on two factors. One, conservation, which requires sacrifice, and the other one, increase in production of American energy, which is going along very well. More coal this year than ever before in history. More oil and gas wells drilled this year than ever before in history. The new economic revitalization program that we have in mind, which will be implemented next year, would result in tax credits which would let business invest in new tools and new factories to create even more new jobs, about 1 million in the next 2 years. And we also have planned a youth employment program which would encompass 600,000 jobs for young people. This has already passed the House, now has an excellent prospect to pass the Senate.
Now the same question goes to Governor Reagan. Governor Reagan, would you like to have the question repeated?
Governor Reagan, during the past 4 years, the Consumer Price Index has risen from 4.8% to currently over 12%. And perhaps more significantly, the nation's broader underlying rate of inflation has gone up from 7 to 9%. Now, a part of that has been due to external factors beyond U.S. control, and notably the more than doubling of OPEC oil prices last year, which leads me to ask you whether, since the United States remains vulnerable to such external shocks, can inflation in fact be controlled? If so, specifically, what measures would you pursue?
Mr. Ellis, I think this idea that has been spawned here in our country that inflation somehow came upon us like a plague and therefore it's uncontrollable and no one can do anything about it is entirely spurious, and it's dangerous to say this to the people. When Mr. Carter became president, inflation was 4.8%, as you said. It had been cut in two by President Gerald Ford. It is now running at 12.7%. President Carter also has spoken of the new jobs created. Well, we always, with the normal growth in our country and increase in population, increase the number of jobs. But that can't hide the fact that there are 8 million men and women out of work in America today, and 2 million of those lost their jobs in just the last few months. Mr. Carter had also promised that he would not use unemployment as a tool to fight against inflation. And yet his 1980 economic message stated that we would reduce productivity and gross national product and increase unemployment in order to get a handle on inflation, because in January, at the beginning of the year, it was more than 18%. Since then, he has blamed to the people for inflation OPEC. He's blamed the Federal Reserve System. He has blamed the lack of productivity of the American people. He has then accused the people of living too well, and that we must share in scarcity, we must sacrifice and get used to doing with less. We don't have inflation because the people are living too well. We have inflation because the government is living too well. And the last statement, just a few days ago, was a speech to the effect that we have inflation because government revenues have not kept pace with government spending. I see my time is running out here. I'll have to get this down very fast. Yes, you can lick inflation by increasing productivity and by decreasing the cost of government to the place that we have balanced budgets and are no longer grinding out printing press money, flooding the market with it because the government is spending more than it takes in. And my economic plan calls for that. The president's economic plan calls for increasing the taxes to the point that we finally take so much money away from the people that we can balance the budget in that way. But we will have a very poor nation and a very unsound economy if we follow that path.
First of all, this is what Donald Trump is supposed to be, a return to common sense. And it just does not come close to Reagan. It takes people today 1 month to say as much as Reagan did in those 3 minutes. And he didn't even deliver on it, but at least he told the truth. He identified the problem. It's not the people who are living too well, it's the government that's living too well. It's a great sentiment. It's the same sentiment as drain the swamp. It's just regretfully inferior. Okay, now the issues, they remain the same 44 years later. Inflation and prices are up, okay, just like today, due to factors outside the U.S. control, just like today. What did we have going on back then? The doubling of OPEC prices, and then this oil shock, the huge oil crisis. Now how? How does this happen? You know, I have to talk about what OPEC is, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Guys, for everybody who's new to it, OPEC is just a little alliance. It's a team of all the mostly Arabic countries that have a bunch of oil and are selling oil to the rest of the world. So it's Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. They have more member countries now, but that's essentially how they started. At the time, that's who OPEC is. Now, they talk about, you know, factors outside of U.S. control. Well, hold on. Who made this happen? How did these countries become so powerful? Were Saudi Arabia always powerful? Venezuela? Were they always having this economic power? No, they haven't. With Saudi Arabia, it wouldn't have happened without Aramco, which is an endeavor of Standard Oil, right? The main monopoly oil company in the United States, John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil. They were the ones who found the oil in Saudi Arabia, and then of course they built it up, and then they built up their wealth, and then they left it to the Saudi Arabians. Venezuela, same thing. You had Royal Dutch Shell, the company that is today Shell. It was Royal Dutch Shell. It was, you know, it was the Dutch, you know, Dutch East India Company, and just, you know, Dutch economic power, colonial power. They built that up in Venezuela. Then later, Venezuela, they nationalized it, right? You had your classic socialist leaders that later they come and they nationalized the oil industry. So that's Venezuela. Now Iran, the British government owned the oil there and the oil endeavors there through the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, and that was also later nationalized as well. None of this stuff happened by accident. The West built up the wealth of these nations. The West created the power of the oil-producing Middle Eastern countries. Where do you think all the Saudi royalty and their wealth and their gold comes from? It's not, they weren't always that rich like that, because wealth comes from technology. It's a product of man's mind. It's not just how much gold you have. It's what you can do with things, right? It's actually about inventiveness. So, and the West made them rich. That's where all our money is going, right? Because, you know, everything is based on oil. This is our current hydrocarbon burning paradigm. So when we, you know, anything we produce, well, who is is producing the fuel for our production. It's these oil exporting countries. So that's where all our money is going. And if it wasn't for American and European technology and business, there would be no OPEC or Saudi wealth. In fact, it's a multi-generational strategy of the robber barons and bankers to export Western wealth to Asia and Africa on purpose in order to maintain and extend their power, primarily through removing wealth from America and Europe, because that's competition. You remove resources and power from the trailblazers and the independent thinkers. You take resources from them and you put them in the hands of who? The traditionalists, the old world minds, who will never change their perspectives and paradigms. They'll never change, and therefore they'll never solve the problems of the human species. So why do I stress this? Yes, it's beyond U.S. control, but it's not beyond the control of those international pressure groups. Every economic crisis in modern history has been the result of human action, not natural factors. It's always mismanagement of resources. The oil crisis of the 70s was no different. In the past years, we've also had factors beyond U.S. control that resulted in inflation and increased prices, right? Say it with me, it's the COVID-19 pandemic. Another crisis not caused by natural factors, but a mismanagement of resources. And really, it's a joke. It goes without saying that it was not incompetence, but a deliberate redistribution of resources, okay? Now, it's hard to defend against that, but Carter's reply is the same as Biden's. We created new jobs, right? He says 8 million jobs. Biden says 9 million jobs. We created jobs. That's an easier rebuttal for Reagan as well as for Trump. Yeah, so you created jobs, but what about all the jobs lost? What about all the unemployment? That's a losing position for the candidate who is the president and is trying to win re-election. It's always harder to get re-elected because things are going to be bad. The economy is going to suck. It does with every president. Marginal improvement under Donald Trump. And I believe it was the same around Reagan's time. Marginal improvement. But it's very interesting here to hear Carter's demand of Americans to sacrifice. I didn't really expect to hear that. This is no longer the strategy. You don't hear that anymore, to directly tell people they need to sacrifice and live a little less comfortably. Not in that way anyway, because it simply just doesn't work. But the same thing continues today. Today, sacrifice has been relabeled as climate change. But it's not so much as a choice the way Carter said it. The way Carter said it is like there's an option. You're supposed to choose to sacrifice because it's the right thing to do. Here, they don't tell you that. It's not so much as a choice, but a necessary step to stave off extinction. That's the same way they got us to put the masks on. They didn't give us a choice because the answer would have been no. But this is how they do it. And here, Carter uses the word conservation actually, and you can pull on that string of conservation and see that it leads directly to the environmental green agenda of today. Sustainable development, all of that. Same thing, right? A linear descendant of that. But in 1980, it was presented in terms of energy and economics. It was about, well, we need to have more energy production. We need to have cleaner energy. Not so much really reducing consumption and all of this stuff going carbon neutral. That wouldn't have worked then. Then it was an appeal to reason. But a few decades later now, appeals to reason, are no longer effective. So environmentalism and progressivism, in general, it appeals to emotion now. The wild habitat, the poor polar bears, the dying sea turtles, or any marginalized group of people, the transgender individuals, any marginalized group of people, it's all about just endless compassion to them. Just appeals to emotion. But it's the same idea, it's just that it was presented in a more respectable fashion back then. Respectability is a theme that comes up again and again with these gentlemen. However, in 1980, we see glimpses of what was to come, and indeed, Jimmy Carter had his own Joe Biden senior moment. I'm going to play a clip where you could really see the difference between them. Reagan, with solid reasoning, addresses him directly, and then you have Carter with an he goes off on an emotional, personal anecdote, and then it deteriorates into like a rambling description of nuclear weapons.
Governor Reagan?
I know the president is supposed to be replying to me, but sometimes I have a hard time in connecting what he's saying with what I have said or what my positions are. Sometimes think it's like the witch doctor that gets mad when a good doctor comes along with a cure that'll work. My point I have made already, Mr. President, with regard to negotiating, it does not call for nuclear superiority on the part of the United States. It calls for a mutual reduction of these weapons, as I say, to the point that neither of us can represent a threat to the other. And to suggest that the SALT II treaty that your negotiators negotiated was just a continuation and based on all of the preceding efforts by two previous presidents is just not true. It was a new negotiation because, as I say, President Ford was within about 10% of having a solution that could be acceptable. And I think our allies would be very happy to go along with a fair and verifiable SALT agreement.
President Carter, you have the last word on this question.
I think to close out this discussion, it would be better to put into perspective what we're talking about. I had a discussion with my daughter Amy the other day before I came here to ask her what the most important issue was. She said she thought nuclear weaponry. And the control of nuclear arms. This is a formidable force. Some of these weapons have 10 megatons of explosion. If you put 50 tons of TNT in each one of railroad cars, you would have a carload of TNT, a trainload of TNT stretching across this nation. That's one major war explosion in a warhead. We have thousands, equivalent of megaton or million tons of TNT warheads. The control of these weapons is the single major responsibility of a president. And to cast down this commitment of all presidents because of some slight technicalities that can be corrected is a very dangerous approach.
And I laughed last night when I heard him talking about the train and each wagon is a megaton explosion. It's like I could see Joe Biden. Even in his face, he's a lot like Joe. And Reagan pointed it out, and Trump did as well. It's the lack of a logical progression. And of course, this is a low-hanging fruit. This is easy pickings to, throw that accusation against Joe Biden. Oh, he doesn't make sense. He's not logical. He rambles. But this, it's the way I see it, that's not so much evidence of incompetence or dementia. It's a byproduct of the nature of their argument. Joe Biden is not running on reason, and neither was Carter. They're running on an emotional campaign, so they're not going to make sense. Because the unspoken thesis behind everything they say is that independence is dangerous. That's what they're saying. We can't start implementing sensible practices because freedom is not safe. We have to keep doing things like we've always done them. That's what Carter's saying. That's why he can't really talk about nuclear proliferation directly. He has to talk about how his daughter is afraid of it and how he wants to really get that fear image through to the people with the help of viewing, a long freight train, and every freight train has like a nuclear warhead. Right? Your argument becomes that you want the other person to be as emotional as you and think it's as big of an issue as it is. That's not a rational argument. And actually, these kind of emotional claims, non-claims, right? They're actually more effective when it comes out of the mouth of an old weak man, a meek, little hunched over senior like Joe Biden. Because otherwise, that underlying idea would come across as shocking and incongruent. It actually wouldn't make sense because an independent adult would not say this. And one of the psychological aspects of the 2024 election that no one has pointed out, that I'll point out, is that Joe Biden, in how he speaks, how he talks, how he looks, his frailty, his indecisiveness, his lack of conviction, timid voice, his hollow eyes, all of that, that's a much closer one-to-one representation of what's inside the average American than what Donald Trump is. plenty of people, plenty of Americans, they want to be Donald Trump. But really on the inside, where you strip all the fluff away, they're a bunch of sleepy Joes. So really, that's the reason why so many people believe what he's saying. Because there's a whole lot of soul searching that even the most knowledgeable, the most strong of us need to do, including me. Trust me, this is the reality. We're much closer to Sleepy Joe than we think. And this is my most important point in this episode. Look at what has remained the same, yes, but look what's changed. The conclusion is the men and women today are so inferior to the men and women 44 years ago. And we've talked about the two presidential candidates as symbols of the people living at the time. That's why we're talking about them. Not that these two individuals matter. They're symbolizing the rest of us, all of us. You can boil them down into these kind of characters, right? These type of teams. A team will always represent the fan base, right? And the candidate will always be a representation of his constituency. So when you look at them, this is the energy and spirit of masculinity. Now, let's look at what symbolizes femininity. And here, as I get towards the end of this show, I'm going to actually play them side by side, 1980 and 2024, because you need to see the change. Here we go.
This is the first presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. This morning, the court ruled on yet another abortion case, temporarily allowing emergency abortions to continue in Idaho, despite that state's restrictive ban. Former President Trump, you take credit for the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which returned the issue of abortion to the states.
Correct.
However, the federal government still plays a role in whether or not women have access to abortion pills. They're used in about 2/3 of all abortions. As president, would you block abortion medication?
Question to President Carter by Barbara Walters.
Thank you. You have addressed some of the major issues tonight, but the biggest issue in the minds of American voters is yourselves, your ability to lead this country. When many voters go into that booth just a week from today, they will be voting their gut instinct about you men. You've already given us your reasons why people should vote for you. Now, would you please tell us, for this, your final question, why they should not vote for your opponent, why his presidency could be harmful to the nation, and having examined both your opponent's record and the man himself, tell us his greatest weakness.
Robert, reluctant as I am to say anything critical about Governor Reagan, I'll try to answer your question. First of all is the historical perspective that I've just described. This is a contest between a Democrat and a mainstream of my party, as exemplified by the actions that I've taken in the Oval Office the last 4 years, as contrasted with Governor Reagan, who in most cases does typify his party, but in some cases there is a radical departure by him from the heritage of Eisenhower and others. The most important, crucial difference in this election campaign, in my judgment, is the approach to the control of nuclear weaponry and the inclination to control or not to control the spread of atomic weapons to other nations that don't presently have it, particularly the terrorist nations. The inclination that Governor Reagan has exemplified in many troubled times since he's been running for president, I think since 1968, to inject American military forces in places like North Korea, to put a blockade around Cuba this year, or in some instances to project American forces into a fishing dispute against the small nation of Ecuador on the west coast of South America. This is typical of his long-standing inclination on the use of American power, not to resolve disputes diplomatically and peacefully, but to show that the exercise of military power is best proven by the actual use of it. Obviously, no president wants war, and I certainly do not believe that Governor Reagan, if he were president, would want war. But a president in the Oval Office has to make a judgment on almost a daily basis about how to exercise the enormous power of our country. for peace through diplomacy, or in a careless way, in a belligerent attitude, which has exemplified his attitudes in the past.
Barbara, would you repeat the question for Governor Reagan?
Yes, thank you. Realizing that you may be equally reluctant to speak ill of your opponent, may I ask why people should not vote for your opponent, why his presidency could be harmful to the nation, and having examined both your opponent's record and the man himself, could you tell us his greatest weakness?
Well, Barbara, I believe that there is a fundamental difference, and I think it has been evident in most of the answers that Mr. Carter has given tonight, that he seeks the solution to anything as another opportunity for a federal government program. I happen to believe that the federal government has usurped powers and autonomy and authority that belongs back at the state and local level. It has imposed on the individual freedoms of the people, and that there are more of these things that could be solved by the people themselves if they were given a chance, or by the levels of government that were closer to them. Now, as to why I should be and he shouldn't be, when he was a candidate in 1976, President Carter invented a thing he called the misery index. He added the rate of unemployment and the rate of inflation, and it came at that time to 12.5 under President Ford. And he said that no man with that size misery index had a right to seek re-election to the presidency. Today, by his own decision, the misery index is in excess of 20%. And I think this must suggest something. But when I have quoted a Democrat president, as the president says, I was a Democrat. I said many foolish things back in those days. But the president that I quoted had made a promise, a Democrat promise, and I quoted him because it was never kept. And today you would find that that promise is at the very heart of what republicanism represents in this country today. And that's why I believe there are going to be millions of Democrats that are going to vote with us this time around, because they too want that promise kept. It was a promise for less government and less taxes and more freedom for the people.
Less government, less taxes, and more freedom. That's how a man talks. And when Barbara Walters asks the question, she radiates femininity in the most profound sense. She asks for the man to be a man, to state his intentions clearly, to make clear sense of the unseen, of the unknown, and she wants to know the man himself. And he wants to know, how is he different from the rest of them? That's what a real woman does. And we're hardly even talking about the peak ideal woman. It's Barbara Walters. Sure, but wow, what a difference between her and this woman during the 2024 debate. And this is no accident. They put up these women that look like scarecrows. Look, I'm just going to be very direct and like upfront with it. Ugliness is objective. And this creature is ugly in how she looks and speaks. Not the appearance that she was born with, because we cannot control that, right? We don't control how we were born. But it's the appearance that she chooses to emphasize and accentuate, and it's the same with men. Oh, how far we have come in 44 years, how far we have fallen to an old folks home Jimmy Carter and a half-baked Ronald Reagan. And as long as so few of us are truly independent men and women, it's only what we deserve. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week on This Week in Tyranny. Happy 4th of July. God bless America.
Cause I'm fed up with that bullshit. I'm fed up with that bullshit. Bullshit. I'm fed up with that bullshit. Bullshit. I'm fed up with that bullshit.